So now that we've restricted the movements of our character to not leave the scene, it'd be nice if there was some stuff in this scene the character could interact with. Some non-playable characters, NPCs. So we can bring those in and set up the interactions, which it's coming up in a couple steps from now, but we'll base the interaction off a collision. So our character will walk around, and I'm just going to leave the non-playable characters in stationary positions. And when our character walks up to them and the two objects collide, then we'll have the interaction. So we need to set things up for that. And a restriction we have for that is in order to detect a collision, one of the objects needs physics to be applied. So I'll do that on the player. And the other ones don't necessarily have to have physics. It often doesn't hurt. But at least one of them does. So I'll just turn the player into an object that the physics engine applies to. And we do that by coming over, selecting the player, coming over to the inspector, and we'll add a component. Take out that little search there, and we want some physics to apply. So the one that just says physics, that's for 3D games. We're in a 2D game, so we need physics 2D. And to apply physics, we have to say something is a rigid body. That's like telling the physics engine that this is a rigid body. It's an actual substance that it can interact with. So we just apply that component. And most of the defaults are okay. We want it to be dynamic. We want it to move around, interact with things. We don't necessarily need a material. We don't need to define it or anything. That most of them are more advanced. One we do have to watch out for, though, is the default settings for Unity are kind of set up for a platform game. We don't have a platform game. We have a top-down view, looking at a map from the overhead view. So we don't want gravity to apply. So by default, gravity would be applied here. So let's just reset that to 0, because gravity, just like gravity, real gravity on Earth, pulls down, which is fine on a platform game where we're running across and our player might fall in holes. But when we're looking down at a map, we don't want our character to suddenly shoot off this way because gravity's pulling it in one of the directions. So just set that to 0. And we also, so that we can tell when a collision happens, we need a boundary around that player. So if we add component again over Inspector and go to Physics 2D, we have these colliders. Those are borders. So a box collider, or a capsule collider, a circle collider, whichever shape we want. Edge collider, we can set up a polygon that will trace it exactly. For this game, I'm just going to go with a box collider. And if we zoom in on the character there, you can see put a box around him. That was already highlighted. So this button here that says Edit Collider, if we click on that, you'll see these little green tabs where we can kind of drag that around and set up how big what we're calling the border of our character. So if you want to, you could make that a little bit bigger so that the character maybe I'll do that. Make it a little bit bigger to the left and the right, so that way when the character gets close to another character, when our character's border here overlaps with another character's border, that's where an interaction is going to happen. Whereas in other games, you might want it really close and not expand beyond the image itself, so that it's clearly a collision. But for us, we'll just get close to the other characters. So one object has to have a rigid body so that physics apply, and then both objects in the collision have to have a collider. So we can bring some new objects in, some other characters, and apply box colliders, and since our player has the physics applied, it will be able to detect collisions between them. And we saw earlier how to bring other characters in, so I'm just going to push F to focus on the room so we see the whole thing. And over here in our assets, from that asset package we downloaded, there's a character folder. Expand this over under characters. The character we dragged in earlier came from this folder called Fantasy, so I'm just going to drag in the rest of the characters from that folder. put one of them up here. And you can see when I drag it over, it applied it as a game object. And once again, we need to make sure there's a collider on each one. So we'll add component, go to Physics 2D, put in a box collider. That's the one we use for our character. So the next one, this dark wizard, I'll drag him over, stick him up in the corner or something. Come over here and add a box collider around it. Then a light wizard, can put him down here in the bottom or something. Just anywhere on the scene, and then our character will walk up to him, and both of them will have a box collider, so that when they get close to each other, the computer will detect a collision. How many more are here? Light wizard, there's a princess. Put a box collider on her. Then a troll. Stick him down here in this corner. And once again, come over to the inspector, add a component from Physics 2D. I'm going to add a box collider. Is that all of them? A troll, princess, a light wizard, oh, a dragon. So I can drag a dragon up here as well. Maybe over here. And that gives us a bunch of other characters we can interact with. As long as one of them has physics applied, which is our character's rigid body, so physics applies. And then all of them have collision bounds, so the computer can detect when a collision happens. So that finishes out that step, and in the next tutorial we will do the scripting for those collisions.